Right. Okay, when you're sitting comfortably, everybody. Right, this is to introduce Peter Paget, author of a book entitled The Welsh Triangle Revisited, based on his previous works published in the 1970s, when he ran the Foundation UFO Research Centre in Warminster, during which time he was asked to investigate the weird occurrences around the US submarine tracking station in West Wales. He can now tell us more of what he found during this time, and his lecture is to be in two parts, and the second part after lunch will be an interactive section. So, introducing Lisa Peter Paget.
First of all, thank you very much indeed, Miles, for his tremendous efforts over the years. It's been significant in putting me in front of the cameras way back in 2015, because I hadn't spoken for 17 years for certain security reasons. I'd first of all like to pay tribute to Kevin Goodman, a student of mine at Warminster Fountain Centre way back in the 70s. Kevin sadly passed from natural causes over the last few months, years, I'm not quite sure when. He was a lovely man, very dedicated, and I owe him a lot. Some of you may wish to buy his book. It's called Cradle of Contact. It's available on Amazon, as indeed are mine. Now, I'm going to cover a lot of material today, and I want you to understand I'm talking to the cameras. Miles has produced this wonderful rig, and that's his main focus. So I'm not talking to any of you personally in the room. I'm talking to a world audience, maybe. At the back of the room, my good friend has a book, which is actually a diary. It's blank, nothing in it. And he, in a short while, will start passing it along the lines from one end to the other. And on each separate new page, please start on the page where the marker ribbon is in. Write, each one of you, if you wish, a question of no more than 6 words, in printed letters rather than handwriting. I have difficulty sometimes reading people's handwriting. Because in the second session this afternoon, I will be able to read all those questions. I won't go through them individually one by one, but I would have been able to review what they were. And I will get a measure of what you want to know, which I will try to address as best as I can. Now, let's start with the big picture. I have always been engaged with dealing with the big picture, the harsh reality of this world, this planet, this earth on which you live, and which I currently live too. So my data, my investigative data, is based on fact. It's based on a lot of investigation, a lot of research, a lot of cross-referencing. It's not hypothetical. It's based on what is known. And what I want to try to do today in this first session, in the limited time we have, is share what we know. Not what we suppose, not what we hypothesize, but what we know. Because the world at the moment is at a crucial point, a metamorphosis between the transition of the old traditions based on history, fact, supposition, prejudice, religion, wishful thinking, and error. And you are indulged in error and misinformation daily by the governments of the world, the millionaires, billionaires, multi-billionaires of the world, the little men of great power who like to feel that they are in control. Because beyond money, which is only a tool, it's all about control. And we are now allegedly at 8 billion people on the surface of this planet Earth, which is a critical moment. And people are aware of that. I first of all want you to make you aware that due to the James Webb Telescope, which is the most wonderful piece of equipment in space and supersedes the Hubble, we are now able to look far, far deeper into the cosmos than ever before. And astronomy and cosmology is going through a revolution and realizing that most of what they knew was incorrect and based on rather facile and naive suppositions, like the Big Bang theory. What a silly idea. God farted one day and the universe was created. How stupid can that get? It actually came from a Roman Catholic bishop originally, that idea, which is no rogue surprise. We are one small planet in one relatively insignificant solar system in one galaxy of which there are millions of galaxies. Millions. If you look at any point of blank sky, any point in any direction, 360 degrees, 3D, you will see with these telescopes, these new telescopes, galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies. And the important thing is that we now, from the current data, have measured that the universe that we can see and perceive is over 93 billion light years across. Now, if you think about that, that is a time measurement. And if, as the old supposition was that the universe was only from the supposed Big Bang, paper bag required, 14 million years old, you could not have a measurement of 93 billion years. Hence, the whole concept of the Big Bang is rubbish. The universe was, is, does exist forever and will be there forever. I remember a very sad experience of going to the London Planetarium as a child, and the lecturer was explaining to us children from school that the universe had been started and would eventually fade into a sort of over the horizon and end. And I thought to myself even then, this is a terrible thing to be telling children, that the universe, like the sad lives of human beings, of only 70 years in general, although you should live to 120, because all mammals, mice and elephants, have the same number of heartbeats, and you should live to 120. That telling these children that it's all going to end. What kind of a message was that? Dreadful message. I'm telling you that now, the data says the universe exists, it has existed forever, and it will exist forever. This is very, very important stuff. It completely rewrites the textbooks. When I was at university, we learnt things which were then considered written in stone. In fact, Einstein, when in his later life wanted to rewrite his thesis, was told, no, you can't say that, sir, because it's in the textbooks, we're teaching it in the universities, and we can't reprint the textbooks, we can't change everything that you have set in stone for the fact that you've now, in your final years, discovered that you were wrong, or maybe you needed to say more than you had said before. It is very important to be able to accept new information which contradicts your comfort zone, which contradicts where you think you are, what you have been told you are by your culture, your religion, your science, your university, your teachers in primary school, most of which is incorrect. Because it's based on supposition, it's based on a guesswork, it's based on a comfort zone. Now, when, in the great days of exploration, the sailing ships of Cook and other wonderful explorers traveled to the Pacific South Sea Islands, and the islanders who had never seen a galleon, never seen a ship of that size, saw these things on the horizon. They thought they were floating islands, and they had no concept of what a ship of that size could be, or that indeed that anything more than a wooden canoe, a dugout canoe, could exist. And this is, I want you to understand, because they were looking at those ships of those explorers in the vocabulary of their ideas. In their ideas, they understood islands, they understood canoes, they didn't understand sailing ships, galleons. So they interpreted those images that they first saw as something which they thought they understood. And this is what I want you and the people out there in the world to understand, is that you have a vocabulary of ideas and concepts based on from when you were a child, maybe even before you were a child, before you were born, but certainly in most cases as a child, which has been taught to you, told to you as a creed or a dogma or a theorem, which is basically unassailable to the establishment who don't want change. Change is dangerous, it's unstable, it's not very predictable. And in this metamorphosis that we are currently in, when the pupa becomes a butterfly, when the larvae that's been crawling about, and most of insects spend their lives as larvae, goes into that state of complete breaking down, and the cells amazingly reconstruct themselves into a moth or a butterfly, is a metaphor of where we are now in the world. Everything is breaking down. Everything is changing. This is not comfortable. This is not comfortable at all. Most of what you have relied upon will go. Let me cover one thing, because I've been in this game for a very long time. I'm 76 years old. I don't have much longer to go. But I started when I was a teenager. And I started, in fact, probably from about the age of 10, when certain things happened, which is in my book, and I'll mention that in a minute. But at the age of a late teenager, I was fortunate enough to invent a oil pollution reduction mechanism, which was coincided with the sinking of Torrey Canyon, which was a ship that went off and sank. Well, it ran aground off the Scilly Isles, was leaking oil. And a good ancient friend of mine, he was 89, Commander Bond. No, James Bond. Commander Bond. Real man. Not James. I said, this needs to be seen by my friend, Sir Zolly Zuckerman. Sir Zolly was the chief scientific advisor to the Cabinet Office, and my thesis was couriered to him that day. 3 days later, after they had worked out they wanted to do something about the Torrey Canyon, he walked into the Cabinet Office with my thesis under his arm. I get emotional about these things because I'm an emotional person. I get nothing from my books or presentations. This presentation today will cost me money, as indeed it will cost Miles money. You know, people do things for reasons that are not monetary in this world and in this country, which I love. Quickly about the books. Back in the 70s, I was tasked to go to St. Bride's Bay, Haverford West area, Pembrokeshire, and hold that up so the camera can get that, and investigate thoroughly what was going on down there. I wrote a book then called The Welsh Triangle. This is the new edition, The Welsh Triangle Revisited, 2018, available on Amazon. And I interviewed, I guess, about 3,000 odd people over a 6-month period. It's a lot of work. Very thoroughly, and got to the bottom, in a way, of what was going on. The press had stumbled across this series of events, and at the time I was working with Hans Holzer, who you may be familiar with, is a wonderful author. He's not with us anymore. He wrote about 49 books on mystical and paranormal things, and I was his agent in publishing. And I walked into Peter Somner, who was his publishing editor at Granada Publishing, associated with Granada TV, and I was working on Hans's documentary, which was going to be about UFOs and aliens and all the other things that he was interested in. And I had under my arm a tabloid newspaper. And the tabloid newspaper said, "The Welsh Triangle." And Peter looked at this, another Peter, he looked at this and he said, "That's a book. That title's a book." He had recently been inspired by the Bermuda Triangle and wanted a competitive volume to increase sales. And he got out his checkbook and he wrote me a check then and there before I'd written a word, because I was a script editor before. He knew I could write. I'd been ghosting for Granada for a while. He said, "Write me a book called The Welsh Triangle." And he sent me to Wales. And I spent some time down there. And this is the result of that. That first book sold 500,000 copies nearly worldwide, and is published in 3 languages. There's one of the French books down there. It's in French. Very rare. And it was also pirated into a Spanish edition, believe it or not. I republished this in 2018, and together with the other book, which was UFO UK, which is in this case updated, well, it came out with New English Library in 1980, and it's now been reissued again on Amazon as updated and with new data. I don't have any copies of my autobiography to sell to you today. In fact, I've only got one each of the other old books put down there. And that's my autobiography, Secret Life of a Spook. Because I have been a spook, believe it or not. Some people don't believe that. But then again, that's the meaning of the word secret. Linda Moulton Howe was going to give me a radio slot on an interview in America. And she cancelled it. She said, "I've had so much pressure from the British not to interview you." And she wanted to see my American tax return, because I was working for the Americans as well. And she said, "You must have an American tax return. Prove to me that you work for the Americans." I said, "Linda, there's something called secret. Don't you understand what that word means? It means secret." Anyway, I mustn't get too emotional. I want to cover a few things. I'm going to go off a bit of a tangent here, but it's not really a tangent. I deal with real things. This stuff here. Okay? And I can tell you what we know. Now, I want to cover 1 or 2 things about entities. And I'm talking about entities that have been seen, worked with, physically examined by various authorities, principally the Americans, to a degree the British, certainly others, the Russians. You're probably familiar with the fact that we have something called the small greys. Small greys are called small because they're about 3.5, 4 feet tall, and they are fairly prolific. I mean, there's lots and lots of reports of them. They're not occasional, they are very well known. They are droids. They are not actually people. People can work through them, through their communication, in the same way that you've all got mobile phones. And if someone was calling you, someone would hear that voice on the mobile phone. And if you're in the Middle Ages, you'd probably be had up for witchcraft or sorcery, because this would be magic, which was obviously the work of the devil. But droids, small greys, are manufactured, and they are distributed through a number of different purposes by various entities and forces outside and inside, out there. You've got to be careful what I say. I'm very careful about what I say. 1 or 2 basic facts. What do we know? We know that by autopsy, you have 2 hemispheres to your brain, left and right. Droids, small greys have 4. Front left, front right, rear right. In the rear area of their brains are implanted certain implants which are covered in carotene because it stops them being rejected by the body, and they work electronically, if you wish. So they can communicate like your telephone, like your mobile phone, and indeed now, you can buy a watch, can't you? You can buy a watch which is, in effect a phone on your wrist. And we're now talking about inserts, chips. I'm chipped. A lot of people are chipped. Some of them knowingly, some of them unknowingly. And through those microchips, communication can occur, and also instruction can occur. And also mood changes and things like that. I mean, going off on a slight tangent, you often heard in various unfortunate incidents the lone assassin, where somebody seems to go completely nuts and does something really, really strange and perhaps kills somebody or does something really bizarre. But of course, they're never connected. They're never sort of attributed to any one agency or country or person. They never have any backup. They never have any teams behind them. They are just a lone assassin. I wonder why they do those things. Some of them may have been programmed. Some of them may have been triggered. Some of them may have been instructed, not knowingly necessarily, to do something really rather dreadful. And that is a science that's been around since 1964, in actual fact, developed in America, and then has moved out to other areas in the world, other regimes. In this world of intelligence, there actually are no secrets. The secrets are kept from you lot out there in the world. You're the ones who mustn't know the secrets. The Russians know everything about what you do in the United Kingdom and the United States. The Chinese know everything as well. We know everything about them. In fact, in the old days, they used to phone each other up because it's good security. If you're going to move a large amount of men and machines and aircraft from A to B on a military exercise, you tell the other side that you're doing this on a given day, and you can even give them numbers, and everyone feels very comfortable, which saves all that flying over of U-2s and spending fuel and satellite pictures. Just, hey, we're going to have a little exercise. And people get very disconcerted if they don't understand what's going on. The Russians, for example, hold a massive exercise every single year. They've done it since I can remember. Thousands and thousands and thousands of men are involved in these exercises. But that was a well-known thing. And they've held one quite recently, a few weeks ago. Come to that later. Let's get back to the aliens, so-called. Charles Fort, who wrote a wonderful series of books, then you should read them for the mystical and odd things that happen in life, said, I think we are property. I think we were I'm paraphrasing, I think we were an unknown area, and somebody came here and colonized here, and now all others have been warned off, and you are owned by something. And he was actually right, because all of the evidence shows that that is correct. The human race, the primates of which you are, I am too, were modified some long time ago in a number of different modifications where you have different races, different racial groups, different features. The actual features between the races, forget skin color, that's a minor thing. I'm not prejudiced in any way whatsoever, but there are differences in the DNA between different racial groups, which indicates that these modifications happened at different times to different areas. And basically, on the Earth, which was a very verdant, warm, much warmer now, global warming, oh my God, we had much more global warming back then, and the plants thrive on carbon dioxide. They do very well, and in warm, damp climates, as you would know, all you gardeners. The primates had developed out of all of the millions of years of natural evolution from the original primordial soup and things coming into the planet and landing as meteorites and infecting and infesting the world with DNA and RNA from other places, which travels across space naturally. And a first group of persons arrived and thought, this looks an interesting kind of world, reasonable kind of atmosphere, nice kind of area to be in, much more interesting than the one we've just come from. And I've always said to people, you are a damn sight more interesting than the aliens up there or down here. You really are much more interesting, much more complex, much more fascinating, got much more potential. Because a lot of the so-called alien races are paused, they are stale, they are pretty boring, and they are really rather simplistic. Because in actual fact, you are very intelligent and creative, but of course you are kept naive and ignorant, in fact a kind of dogmatic ignorance that prevents you from investigating, I'm talking you as a race, not as individuals, from knowing what you should know. And a long time ago, the first humans, new mans were created as helpers, which interprets basically as jovial slaves, to do the work, usually in those days of mining gold, because gold is extraordinarily important to certain functions, including monoatomic gold, which is one atom as opposed to the bipolar atom, and is extraordinarily helpful in longevity. Diversifying for a moment, and coming forward a long way in time, the Egyptian dynasties, which lasted some 3,000 years over the various dynasties, developed and had given to them a science which we still don't really understand, but involved huge megalithic structures, the Great Pyramids and many, many other pyramids. There are over 150 pyramids in Egypt, and pyramids in other parts of the world, and even in Antarctica, under the ice or sticking up out of the ice. And that technology, I could call it, involved natural materials, which were there readily available. By the way, I hope that book is going around and people are writing questions, because if I don't know what you want to know, I don't take verbal questions. It's most usually if I read the question. So pass the book around, and I've also got some sterilizer there passing around, so if you're worried about the pen being held by other people. To diversify. In the Great Pyramid, there was a chamber in which there was the stone box, allegedly for the burial of the pharaoh. Not so. It was never a tomb. That box could never have been gotten through the door, so it must have been put there before they actually put the roof on the pyramid, if you want to look at it like that. And it was stood by the edge of the chamber, just by the line, the sight line that goes up. I ought to do some drawings, otherwise people feel, well, it's provided this and I don't use it. Chamber's about there, and there are sight lines. Those sight lines go up towards Sirius at a certain time, because you can understand if the world is spinning at a certain time of day, certain time of the year, at a certain point, you'll hit a particular target. So timing in geomancy, timing in terms of ancient monuments and stone circles is critical. That's why they were so precise about their calendars. Because if you want to send to that location, you have to get the timing right, don't you? Otherwise you'll be way off target. And the box was there, and this hole, and I'm going to draw it actually in real time here. The actual hole is about that size. That is real. That's all. You can't get a person up there. And it goes up, and it meets then a door in which there are a couple of handles, copper handles, which are broken, one's hanging down like that. And then there's a chamber beyond that, because they've bored a hole through this and gone in, and there's another chamber beyond. But it doesn't go to the outside, because all of these functions in the pyramid are resonance chambers. Now, you're probably aware in South America, there are a lot of ancient structures, and you have something called the H-stones. And the H-stones have an interesting function. Here, this is very vague, and inside, this is not exactly accurate, but my point is, this goes in. Imagine this is here, this is going in, this is going in, all right? Why? Because these are like organ pipes. In a church organ, if you blow air down a pipe, the pipe will create a resonance, and that resonance creates a sound. And depending on the size of the pipe and the length of the pipe, like a flute, it will make a different sound, a different resonance. If you go into this chamber, you send a wave into here, you get a certain frequency. You go into here, it changes the frequency. You go into here, it changes the frequency. And all of these H-stones are different because they have different tones. They have different functions. And in the Great Pyramid, which is an example, you know the Great Chamber, the Grand Gallery, it goes up like this. All right? I don't know if you people have been there. It's a wonderful place. Why does that do that? Because as you go up, this is a certain frequency, this is another frequency, this is a different frequency. You're changing the frequency using sound. If you take a chamber, I used to work for CERN for a while, and if you have three it's always three, Tesla knew that, and you focus these sounds, an object here can be made to levitate using sound. Sound is critical. While we're on the subject of threes, as I've told you before in my previous lectures, if you have three people, this is my best art. This person here is generating thoughts, and they're sending it to this person here who's receiving those thoughts and editing it and magnifying it and sending it to this person here who's also acting as a transducer and sending it back to this person here. Whenever three are gathered, I am here. Wherever three are gathered together, my church is here. Jesus told you that. Three people can work miracles. More than one, more than two, three. Tesla told you 3, 6, 9. It's key figures. When you have droids, I told you about the grey droids, they never work as singles. They work as 3s or 6s or 9s. Why? Because they're using this amplification function. Their actual voltage per animal or per creature is low. But by 3, they can amplify and create a greater field, because you all have a field. You are sitting there in a biological body, but we could stick electrodes on you and we could measure your neurological voltage. And as you know, you have a neurological system which is both sending out and receiving back. And that is how you operate your muscles and how part of the brain works. But the brain is only a receiver from the mind. And the mind is in a different etheric space. Now this is important. You live in half a universe, which is here. You are in that bit. There's another universe which is that bit. When you have your violet to red spectrum, this stuff, with your eyes, you are dealing with this part of the universe, the function. Scales on a piano, chords, octaves. You do not see this part here. It is invisible to you. We know from studies of the universe that 95% plus of matter is invisible. And I don't mean it's obscured by dust or it's hidden behind another stellar body. You simply cannot see it. But we know it's there because it bends light. And if you look out in the universe, you will see this particular galaxy there. And if it's far enough away and behind certain fields, you will see it here and here and here. You will see it maybe 4 or 5 times. The same galaxy, but depicted by 4 routes, or the Americans would say routes, to your eye here. Light bends. When a star goes behind the sun, it is bent, the light from that star is bent around the sun by the gravity of the sun. So when it's actually just behind the sun and over the horizon, and you shouldn't be able to see it, you still see it because the light is bent around the sun. And this is why we know, this is what we know, that in the universe there are these many, many fields, and there is this function of the fact that there is much more to the universe than this stuff. In 3D matter, the distance between atoms is about equivalent in an analog to the distance between stars. So here's an atom, there's an atom, there's an atom, there's an atom, there's an atom. You call this solid stuff, you call this matter, because the resonance of this atom is working at the same as that resonance there, and they have a repulsion to each other. So if I put my hand on that table, the table resists my hand going through. But if I change the frequency of my hand would go through that table as if it wasn't there, because there is more empty space than there is actual atoms. The atoms combine together in molecules and various structures and form crystals and what have you, and you build up this structure of what you see around you, which is extraordinarily complex. The whole complexity of the universe is very difficult for human beings to understand or even get a grasp of. You sitting there, each have about 3 trillion cells. Your auto function is working 3 trillion cells, and you have one conscious mind concept in a moment, and you have a linguistic language, which is what I'm using now. But behind that linguistic language, the entities who you call ETs use thought. And thought is a concept which can be interpreted into language, Spanish, French, English, Russian, whatever you want, Chinese. But that Chinese or Russian or English is not the thought. It is a version of the truth. Like a German word will have many, many functions that describes what the thing is. It's a thing you sit on with 4 legs and it's got a pad on it. In German would be says it's just a chair. We say it's a chair. But in German they tend to describe it like in Latin. Your Latin names are descriptions, pictorial descriptions of what the thing is. And that's why Latin names are often quite long. It used to be that you couldn't get a job in the Foreign Office unless you could speak Latin. Things have changed. Now you can get a job as the President of the United States without even speaking English. Not that I'm prejudiced. I'm not. I just like to see intelligent people in command. It would make such a nice surprise. This planet, I'm dodging about here, excuse me, was colonized principally on the demise of Mars. Mars, we know, was a verdant planet with oceans, ocean beds, life, creatures, vegetation. It was the place of a very old civilization which had empathy and correlation with other places in this solar system and in solar systems nearby. I'm talking solar systems, not cosmoses, not galaxies. I'm talking local backyard stuff. Pyramids are seen everywhere. As you know, the pyramids of Mars, pyramids on the Earth, pyramids in Antarctica, pyramids seen on other moons as you further go out into the solar system, this solar system. Pyramids, very important basic functions. Not tombs, please, do me a favor. The Egyptians copied them subsequently because they knew that they had celestial properties, they had spiritual properties. The soul could be sent home, maybe. There's another function, just when passing. There are some amazing boxes, I'm going to call them boxes, because I can't pronounce the word properly, which they say housed bulls, as in, male cows, large bulls. And they put the bulls in these boxes, really, and they buried them. Actually, the boxes had to be there before they built the cave, or they built the roof on the cave, because you can't, again, get the boxes out the door. They've never found any bulls in these boxes, but this is a nice myth. The boxes are incredibly accurate. They are very heavy. They weigh about 100 tons. They're granite. And they fit with microscopic precision on the lids, which are about that thick, very heavy. They were prisons for dodgy souls who needed to be contained, when in those days certain persons, certain entities of a rather dodgy character were imprisoned and put in something they could not get out. There's a tradition in some churchyards that you put iron railings around a tomb because it tends to keep the soul, if the soul is still there when buried, inside the space. Maybe. But it's the same general principle. And of course the tomb robbers, who were always looking for a bit of loot, removed, you can prise the lids off and people got out. Which is why some things are in a bit of a mess down here at the moment. Because this planet is a no man's land. It's neither that civilization or that one or that one or that one. It's in the middle. And it's always been fought over economically by the various groups who had influence at any one time. Now Mars got a little bit unfortunate insofar as it was decided by certain entities that it would be destroyed. And it was destroyed very effectively. There's a book called Death on Mars. You should read it. Because Mars is covered with a very thin layer of radioactive fallout which you only get from a nuclear explosion. It doesn't occur naturally at all. So we know that Mars had an atomic weapon, or in fact 2 huge atomic weapons exploded on it, which destroyed the atmosphere, destroyed the planet, turned it into a desert. There is some things there now, but basically it is a desert. And about that period, the entities and the civilization who had to abandon Mars came here. So you're all Martians, in effect. I'm being joking in a way, but you are a mixture. You're a mixture. If you go back in ancestry in your DNA, you know that, of course, none of you are white, none of you are black, none of you are yellow or pink or green. You are mixtures. And then, according to certain cultural and evolutionary effects, your skin becomes, darker or lighter or what have you. Now, let's just get back to our entities a moment. There's the taller greys. The taller greys are about 5'6", 5'10". They are actual creatures, as opposed to the smaller ones which are droids. Smaller greys are droids. They are machines. They're a bit like your phone, but they're not actually people. They're expendable. This is why they use them so much to come down here, because if they get taken out, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if your car got crushed, it might be a heartbreak, but there's not actually, you can buy another car. Greys are not mammals. You are a mammal. What is a mammal? A mammal gives birth to live young. Dolphins are mammals. You are mammals. Primates are mammals. Greys are not mammals. They do not give birth to live young. The autopsies have shown that the entities which have been recovered have no effective digestive system. It's atrophied. They've used the DNA to create an entity, whether it be a droid or even a larger creature, but they don't actually eat. They don't have teeth, they have gums. The mouth is a slit, it's not designed to eat food. The ears are just a hole. It is not directional like a cat. A cat will turn its ear, won't it? It will become directional. It will be able to pinpoint where a sound is coming from. The holes on a grey or a droid are just a hole. It is a microphone, if you wish, but it is not directional like a cat. What does that tell us? That tells us that they have no predators and they don't hunt. Because cats hunt by listening and by using their whiskers when it's dark. And if you look at animals, you can tell about their lifestyle. So we know that if you're looking at grey terrain, a grey element, a grey ship, a grey body, that is in the infrared. Their eyesight is principally in the infrared. A bee is in the ultraviolet. If you're wearing a very white shirt, a bee will come and land on you because it thinks you're a very, very big flower. But an infrared looks grey to your vision. Cows and dogs tend to see down the red end of the spectrum, hence red rag to a bull. They see red, orange, yellow. They don't see blue, greens. To them, blues, greens are grey. So we understand that if you see something which is grey, it's because you're not perceiving its actual colour. A camera that is orientated towards a particular spectrum will see it as a colour. Now, some interesting colour pictures of the moon have been appearing over the last 10, 20 years, which shows that on the moon you actually do have some blue spots. There's one in Arcturus, which is definitely a base. It's a dome, it's a blue dome. And one of the things, because the moon is the principal controlling body here in the Earth lunar system, moon controls Earth. Moon farms Earth. On the moon there are a given number of entities, nothing like the 8 billion you have here, but they have their own mechanisms, and they need from the Earth resources, water. They collect water on a regular basis, fresh water. They also collect seawater because it contains other useful elements. They collect people because they need labor. When there's a migration in Africa and the wildebeest, 200,000 wildebeest travel from the grazing here to the grazing there, they cross the river in which there are crocodiles. And the crocodiles take out a certain number of the wildebeest, usually the elderly, the young, the sick, because they can catch them easier. And the numbers are relatively nominal. Maybe you lose 1 or 2% of the wildebeest. So the herd is sustained, and maybe you could argue that it's used for editing. Make that analogy here. 8 billion people on the earth. 411, those of you who read in America, national parks, people disappear. They vanish. Some of them come back, not many. They go. Where do they go? They don't find them. They do find bodies occasionally, but the ones who just go. Somebody goes on a walk, a child or a man or a woman, suddenly, where are they? Where they've gone? Sometimes from nearby. They've gone. Never found. No body, no corpse. They scan the area with infrared and planes and hundreds of people and tracker dogs. Nothing is found. Tracks go in the snow, and then there is no tracks. Where do they go? Well, this is the nasty bit. Some of them are food, because some of the greys do not eat, they bathe. They bathe in vats of enzymes, and they get those enzymes from cows and horses and humans. Not very many. You don't notice it like the wildebeest, 1 or 2%, probably a fraction of 1 or 2%. It doesn't affect you unless you're the parent of or the brother of the person who's gone. It's a numbers game. You are not the head of the food chain, as the American guy who used to work on the real investigation has told you. It's a very key phrase. He said, you are not the head of the food chain. Generally speaking, you are protected. Now let's come to the Nordics. I know a lot about the Nordics. Nordics have blue eyes. They're generally pale in color, except when they're suntanned, and they have blonde hair. What does that tell us? It tells us that they're from a cooler climate. In the Welsh Triangle, which I'm supposed to be talking about, which is a minor thing, I'll come to that in a minute, the entities who I investigated were tall, they were big, about 7 feet, and they wore spacesuits. And the spacesuits had a helmet, and the helmet had a dark visor on the front. They didn't necessarily wear them at night, this is witnessed, they just wore them during the day. What does that tell us? It tells us that they are sensitive to ultraviolet light. They don't like ultraviolet light, which is, because this planet is only a third from the sun, you have a high level of ultraviolet light, which, as you know, can be injurious in the alpha or the beta, I can't remember which one it is. And that tends to damage cell structures over a period of time. Causes skin cancer, if you wish. So the entities who were wandering about in the Welsh Triangle at that time were big guys, were in spacesuits, and they had an air tube coming over into the mouth. So they had a need to have gaseous support. They couldn't just easily breathe the Earth atmosphere at that elevation. Now, Nordics, also seen in other locations, have worn spacesuits with the visor. And when they have had their helmet off, they have been seen to need to improve the oxygen or whatever it is intake by doing this. You'll see swimmers do this before they do an Olympic race. They will stand there and they will take in a deep breath. I'm doing it too quickly, and they will use a pressure system like this. That forces more oxygen into your lungs rather than just breathing normally. And the alien, the big guys, have been seen to do that. So they're not too happy with the atmosphere. It's not rich enough for them. They tend not to like to work under 1,000 feet elevation above sea level. A lot of the contacts occur at higher elevations because the atmospheric pressure is lower. They're more comfortable with that. Sea level is quite heavy atmosphere. You've got several tons of air bursting down on you. You can adjust, any creature can adjust to a degree on pressure. If you go down into the deep depths of the oceans, you'll find creatures in the oceans that are actually working under tremendous pressure. But because their body is at the same pressure as the water, they can cope with that. If you bring up a fish, a deep sea fish, too quickly, it will explode because the pressure inside the fish will cause it to expand and it can't cope with it. A little bit of biology. Nordics, generally speaking, which I'm connected with, guard you. They are your guardians. They protect you to the degree that they can. In the 80s, there was a concerted attempt, generally successful, to disarm the nuclear warheads worldwide. This is why Rendlesham was such a secret, because if it was known that the Rendlesham stocks of the American warheads had been disarmed, you had no deterrent. It was only later that everyone realized that the Russians and everybody else had had the same thing done to them, which was secret. Because although 2,000 warheads experimentally have been exploded on the surface of the Earth in the past 75 years, no one intensity of fallout or damage has been enough to radically damage the biosphere. The biosphere is my concern. I have prevented 2 nuclear accidents on this planet which could have been quite serious. Other people have done other major work, and we continue to do so. There is a system in place which annoys the military forces at bay because they can't do anything about it, which is called stationed, let's try to get the term right. We don't have UFOs now, do we? We have another term, UAPs, isn't it? Yeah. We know what they are. When the craft, the fleet, the American fleet was doing its exercises, and the carrier is here, and it's flying off its jets, and they're entering a zone, an airspace, restricted airspace, there is an entry point where the aircraft enter the war zone, the war game zone, and they do their exercises, and then they come back out through that war zone entrance. It's a routine. It keeps people safe, stops people crashing into each other, keeps civilian aircraft outside and fishing boats outside, because sometimes they use live ammunition. And the UFOs, the UAPs, know where that is. And the pilots would go off, and they'd come back, and there's the damn thing waiting there for them. We know what they are. They're there every day. Do you know what they do? They're watching. And they are not manned, they're automated. They are made of exotic vacuum object material. Hutchison, look it up, Canada, Hutchison, the Hutchison effect. Orbs that appear out of material where within the orb there is a jelly-like reduction of the structure. A malleable jelly material is created in the metal, and at 1 micron outside of the orb, there is no temperature rise whatsoever. None. These electron clusters can make objects which can go through other objects. They go through them. If you take a glass beaker and you cool it down in liquid nitrogen, and you pour a liquid into the glass beaker, even though it's solid, it will go right through the beaker, because you have reduced the rotation of the atoms such that it becomes porous. And the liquid will go right through and out the other side, as long as it's at that temperature. While we're talking temperatures, you're probably aware of these wonderful quantum static effects by which you can take a ring of magnets, you can take a superconductor, cool it again, and you put the superconductor on the ring of magnets like a track, and you put it there above the surface, and it's above the surface by that distance maybe, and it will sit there. And you can tweak it like that, and it will go round just like a wonderful little toy. And even an object which is a bump, it will go over the bump and come back, it will not move. But you can, with your hand, you can move the angle. That's called quantum locking. Very interesting function, quantum locking. It's what UFOs use. The videos from 2004 from the American Navy saw the craft going along, comme ça, and then rotate through 90 degrees like that. That is when they are locking on to their target point, because the mechanism inside with the gravity generators has to lock to the destination. When they take off, even at Nellis, they take off by about 30 feet. They stop, they move away, they pick up a little bit of momentum, which is not aerodynamic because there's no aerodynamic function, and then they will rotate, they will lock, and they will go. And at that moment, the acceleration to 0 to Mach 9 is almost instantaneous. The cameras, which work at about 60 frames a second, as opposed to the old photographic cameras, which are about 24, a video camera works at about 30 plus 30, about 60, will just about capture it on 1 or 2 frames. And preferably in the infrared, because it's easier to do that. The Americans have had granted machines for some years. Was it not the person at Skunk Works who says we can take E.T. home? It's unfortunate that the Americans very cleverly moved their more advanced gifts into private companies. Corso, the day after Roswell. Read it. A very high-ranking man, highest clearance possible, distributed his bits and pieces that came from the various crashes, not just Roswell, and gave them to various corporations and said, oh, here's this, we've recovered this, we think it could be Russian, we don't know what it does, play around with that, see what you can do with that. And from that came Kevlar, optical fibers, all kinds of other stuff. When he died, he said that they'd only really investigated about 20% of what they recovered. So it was 80% still in the box. Boxes, hangar 18 if you wish. And the problem is material science. If you have a technology and you understand the technology, but you don't have the metal or the material to make the technology, the bits that make it work, you can't actually produce the artifact. You might be gifted or you might have acquired a crashed UFO. You might know how it works. You might even be able to get 2 or 3 pilots to operate it. But you can't necessarily go out and make it because you don't have the right materials. You don't have the material science. And Lazar said they were waiting for the material science to catch up to what they understood about the technology, element 115. Most of the technologies that are very advanced work at room temperatures. You don't require steam, you don't require fission reactors. They work at room temperatures, but they often are very high voltage. On UFOs, so-called, you'll see everything is rounded. There are no sharp points. Why? Because if you have a sharp point, like say on this item here, you have a sharp point, an electric charge will bleed off that point. Simple physics. But if everything is round, it won't bleed off. It will hold its charge. A UFO will tend to try to hover, but it doesn't want to touch down because it will earth. And to get it to charge up again is putting a lot of energy into it. Getting back to the items who were monitoring the American fleet, and they're still there, and they're all over the place because they've got every single nuclear submarine shadowed. This is known. Every single nuclear submarine, every single nuclear base, every single arsenal is shadowed. And they would allow a tactical explosion, but they will not allow a strategic Third World War. Why? Because they have a vested interest in this planet as a resource. They need it. It's not just for your own good. They don't want to lose it. They've spent too much time here building it up. they have interests here. They always have puppets, human beings who work with them, who basically tend to look up to them because they think they're sort of godlike. But if a man drives a Jaguar, does it make him any better than a man who drives a 20-year-old Ford Corsair or Ford Cortina? No. Technology does not give ethics. Technology gives ability. And often, the people with poor ethics hijack the people who are controlling the technology and get them to work for them because they've got the money or the influence or the family connections or whatever, or the blackmail. Because most politicians in certain parts of the world are controlled by blackmail, one way or another, or monetary gain. Why else would they be there? But Lord Manchester said, I think, to Cromwell, if you are not in the House of Commons for your own good, why are you here? I've misquoted him, but it basically means that if you're in politics, probably you're in it for gain. So, where were we going? Yeah, what I was going to say, the objects who were monitoring the American fleet either did static positioning or they ran what they call the road race. They do this. Do you know why they do that route? Because while you're going down this route, you're not expending energy. If an object is traveling in its momentum at a given speed, and say it has virtually zero friction on the air because it's surrounded by ionization, it's in a bubble, it's not spending energy. Only it spends energy when it moves around that curve. When you move around that curve, you're expending energy. You're transferring the energy from one vector to another. And that's a known factor, that the craft that monitor the fleets and others are in what we call parking order. They're like in aircraft, say, at Heathrow. You know, if an aircraft comes in, has to wait, goes on a parking orbit, doesn't it? Given our elevation, just goes round and round and round, waiting for its slot to get into the airport. There are thousands of UAPs on this planet, most of them operating autonomously. They have AI, intelligence. They relate to their operators. It used to be, for example, in the Roswell, when the entities came out, the one or two who survived, they were clutching their keyboards. And the keyboards had the imprints of their hand on them. And they use keyboards because by touch, by electrostatic reference, they can change the voltage at the end of their fingers. You can too. Any healer can. Anybody who's psychic can change that voltage. And you can imbue that voltage to the other person. So if somebody has a pain, which is just a neurological signal, you can override that pain either with TENS or acupuncture or electroacupuncture or by using your own voltage if you've got enough energy. I encourage you to develop your energy. Other people were speaking here, speaking about the same thing, your energy. You are suppressed. Mentally, emotionally, psychically, you are suppressed, like sheep by a sheepdog. Sheepdog's called fear. If you take command of your own being and know that you can take command of your own being, you ignore the sheepdog. If the 20 sheep all turned and faced the sheepdog would run away, wouldn't it? Because it's not stupid. But because the sheep think, well, that's a wolf, it's going to eat me, better all herd together, and I'll come. And the perfect, wonderful shepherds, aren't they? They blow the whistle, and the sheepdogs move the sheep around, and they go through the gates in open fields. Think of civilization out there as the same thing. The media, the television, the fear, Project Fear. You've got to be afraid. You've got to be really afraid. And you need something to protect you called the military or government or whatever. Because that is the control mechanism. If you take away the fear, and my God, you can't control people anymore. Unfortunately, fear works better with human beings than love. Love is very powerful, but most human beings are controlled better by fear. That's a fact. It's an unfortunate fact, but it's true. Now, what I'm hoping, if that book is going around and you're writing your questions, 6 words, please. And please, I haven't seen it come to the front yet. Oh, there it is. Thank you. That's appreciated. I will look at those and take a reading of what you maybe thought you wanted to understand. And if I can, I will try to answer them in the second session later this afternoon. I don't guarantee to answer all of them, and I don't guarantee that I will know the answers. If I don't know, I will say I don't know, because I'm a realist, I'm a pragmatist. Nothing that I tell you is supposition. I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't insult you with supposition. If it's a theory, I'll tell you it's a theory. But most of what I tell you is absolutely the way it is. And the powers that be that I used to advise and still do, occasionally, if they bloody well listen. Sorry to swear, shouldn't have done that. Know a lot of these things. The American presidents, Eisenhower, Truman, Roosevelt to a degree, Clintons, even Trump, knew a lot of what I've told you. Carter asked for a briefing and cried. When he was told. You do not own your own planet. You are trustees of your own being for a temporary lease. How much time have we got, people? Technical, how much time? 5, 10? 10? 10 minutes? Okay, that's great. Fantastic. I'm looking at my clock here. I want to this afternoon cover different things, and I will call them coincidences. See, I am very aware that in the present mood, style, and culture of big tech and influence, you are censored. And you are censored more now than you have ever been censored. Because dear Miles there is putting this out eventually on some kind of platform, and he knows as well as I do that if you don't say the right things or you're not on message, you will get deplatformed, you will get demonetized, you will get shut up, you will vanish from the internet search engines, because the algorithms now, and these are the supercomputers, monitor every single message. And I'm not kidding. I was in this business. Every single message is reviewed by supercomputers, which, as you know, can do millions of billions of calculations a second. They're amazingly clever, amazingly capable. And your mobile phone, whether it's a smartphone or not, is reporting your position every 30 seconds to the system. It can listen to you. It can view you through its camera. And the only way that you can actually stop that happening is to take the battery out, because the battery has the function in it. It's not even in the chip. In the Bourne films, the Bourne Identity, etc., there was a number of wonderful, interesting films. You'll see the female agent take her phone out when she's trying to go under radar, take the battery out and stamp on it, because she knows that that's the reporting function. It's not mentioned in the film. Those who know what to look for in things will see these things and say, I know what that is. See, fiction often will give you things in plain sight, knowing that you are too naive, you just don't see it. When you know about these things, you see it. It's there, it's right in your face. And it tells you a lot. There's a lot that comes out in films. A lot of sneaking in. Oh, I really know, I'll tell them this. They won't know, but I'll get it in. Because it's authentic. And there is very little secret in this world. My business for 50 years was secrets. I know things that you cannot know. And I cannot tell you because there is a 30 and 50-year rule which I observe because I'm on side. And when I say I'm on side, I'm not on side to money-making billionaires or career politicians. I'm on side to this country, this planet, and this biosphere. I am one of the guardians. I have influence. I've had 3 letters from Boris, 1 from May, saying thank you, and several from Wilson, because I'm non-political. I send them bloody memos every damn day, saying wake up. I don't talk about ethics, I talk their language. I talk about security, I talk about welfare, I talk about energy. I talk about common sense, which I will talk more about later this afternoon. Because we are in uncharted territory. We, at the moment, the planet, the human race, any country, not just yours, not just China, not just Russia, not just USA, not just Ethiopia, we are in a very dangerous time. And only if we stand up and talk meaningfully to the people who do have influence on this stuff will we get any sense and any security out of the future for our children and our grandchildren. I'm fed up with PR lies and PR statements and public relations and wishful thinking. We've done with all that. This is real. This is today. This is the next 2 years. I told you guys out there, not you guys, 23 to 26, this is the dangerous time. This is the chicane. This is when all of the factors come together and things will be decided. Materially, emotionally, psychically, futuristically. This is not a drill. This is not entertainment. This is real. And if we get it wrong, either as people or as politicians or as billionaires or as players, we are in danger of going the way Mars went some many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago, because it can happen. I'm not scaring you. I'm saying wake up, write to your MP, go on to the internet, make your influence felt. Don't sit there in the corner meditating and be in private, although that's a useful thing to calm you down, but do something. You are a democracy, and 1,000 years of history in this country fought for that democracy. Don't let it go. Don't be a puppet to other factors and other people who want to use you and influence you and tell you what to do and give you a load of absolute rubbish about what's going on in the world. The world is in trouble. And I don't mean woke, and I don't mean green, and I don't mean climate change. I mean the world is in serious trouble. Duran on the internet. Redacted on the internet. McGregor, Colonel McGregor, on the internet. Look these people up. Find out what's going on. Think. Turn on the little grey cells. Stop being sheep. Start being the sheepdog. Because you have to change history. And history has been written by influential people to their own benefit. And also by alien influences who are just equally mercenary. When various aliens came in, and some of them were very noble, and given you wonderful messages of the Ten Commandments, or in cubic Hebrew, which is also found in South America, and wonderful ethical concepts of how it will be. They paraphrase themselves as gods with a small g. They are not gods. They are simply people who have had a technology for a very long time and have came here and are still here and in different places and are in fact vying amongst themselves. There have been seen to be competition between various groups of so-called aliens, and you're aliens too, because you're not indigenous to this planet. The indigenous creatures of this planet are out there. You're not indigenous to this planet. You've been here for no more than 250,000 years, which might sound a long time to you, but it's not very long in galactic terms. Not long at all. There isn't enough time for you to evolve to where you are biologically in 250,000 years. You were changed. When you're in a church, you go to the resonance point of the altar. You are altered, not because of some creed, but because of the resonance of the building which was built to that effect. If you go into a Masonic, I don't mean by the Masons, but something was built by the Masons to a medieval standard of the resonance function, and you stand at a certain point, your body will resonate with that point. And the singing or the chanting is all part of creating the sound, because the sound is critical. That's why singing is so wonderful, so healing, so uplifting. It's non-linguistic. You can appreciate music that's come from Russia, China, Africa. Your grammatical language limits you. I speak English, vaguely, but I'm using thought. I can give you a thought. An Egyptian hieroglyph is a thought. A Chinese or Japanese symbol is a thought. Yes, it has a sound symbol, it will create a name, it will create a word, but it's actually a thought. And you are receiving thoughts and you can create thoughts. And I encourage you again, I give you three key points. You must work with other people. You must work with 2 other people to create a body of 3. Thank you. A body of 3. You must be absolutely honest, and you must trust each other to keep that security, to keep that confidence. You can love each other, and hopefully you do at an etheric level, but above all, you must turn on your intellectual capacity to understand, and you must be prepared to accept information which is uncomfortable. You must give up wishful thinking and deal with reality. You have 3 years. I will see you this afternoon.